Hello, and welcome to the Movies Past and Present podcast. It's March 17th, 2023, and this is episode 100. I'm your host, Stanford Clark, and I'm podcasting from the crossroads of the West in beautiful Salt Lake City, Utah. Just like my blog, moviespastandpresent.com, I'll be providing recommendations, commentary, and reviews about current and classic cinema. Thanks for tuning in, and let's do this thing. Well, it's my 100th episode, if you can believe it. So many thanks to my wonderful listeners who have hung in there with me. And I hope we've got a lot of great content ahead of us in the future. The new in theaters section this week highlights two films. Last week, the movie Scream 6 opened. This is a horror film from Paramount Pictures. It's directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette. I'm not much into these horror movies. So, although I'm very aware that of these Scream movies, and I can't believe this is only the sixth one. It seems like there's been so many more. Following the latest Ghostface killings, the four survivors leave Woodsboro behind and start a fresh chapter, and you can imagine who follows them. The press materials say this is unlike any other Ghostface, and again, I'm coming from a place of ignorance, but I would tend to disagree. It seems like it's very much like all other Ghostfaces. Anyway, Scream 6 is now in theaters. It is rated R by the Motion Picture Association for strong bloody violence and language throughout and brief drug use. Opening up today in theaters is Shazam! Fury of the Gods. This is from DC Comics and Warner Brothers. It's directed by David F. Sandberg, who also directed the first Shazam film that we had a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. It continues the story of teenager Billy Batson, who, upon reciting the magic word Shazam, is transformed into his adult superhero alter ego, who in the film is played again by Zachary Levi. This film's got, I think, much of the cast that was in that first film. It also has got Helen Mirren in it, Lucy Liu, and Rachel Zegler, who played Maria in Steven Spielberg's retake of West Side Story. I didn't just love the first Shazam. I thought, not a huge fan of the way DC has been doing their comic book movies. And this one, I just thought, I thought that first one was really uneven in that it was somewhat comedic, and then it would go to really, very violent or kind of scary. Just for me, it just felt very uneven. And again, probably not the one to ask, but this looks like the same creative team is in place, and so maybe more of the same, maybe not. Zachary Levi is very appealing in the role of Shazam. But anyway, this is also one of those movies that the trailer has been playing. They've kept moving the release date, so the trailer's been playing, it seems like, for over a year. I'm just sick to death of seeing it, but glad it's finally open. And again, maybe it's one of those things, not unlike Top Gun Maverick. I was so sick of that trailer, but then when that movie opened up, it was so good. Although I don't think this is going to be nearly as good as Top Gun, but still, just trying to give it the benefit of the doubt. Shazam! The Fury of the Gods is rated PG-13 by the Motion Picture Association for sequences of action and violence and language. Now, also coming to the big screen, and this is just more of a save the date thing, but it's My Neighbor Totoro, playing in theaters March 25th through 29th. This is the first film in this year's Studio Ghibli Fest, which is put together by G-Kids and by Fathom Events. G-Kids has the North American distribution rights of these Studio Ghibli films. And they always put together, I think, a really nice collection or selection of films from the Studio Ghibli catalog. This year's no exception. What they're doing this year is highlighting all 10 of the films that were directed by Hayao Miyazaki, who is, of course, one of the most revered animation directors still working today. And it's their first ever nationwide retrospective of his Studio Ghibli works, including several anniversary titles. It's the 35th anniversary of My Neighbor Totoro. As previously mentioned, the 15th anniversary screening of Ponyo, and the 10th anniversary screening of The Wind Rises. Other films that are going to be shown are Kiki's Delivery Service, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Castle in the Sky, which is one of my favorites, Princess Mononoke, which is also another one I love, Porco Rosso. I like that one too. I guess you say I like these Hayao Miyazaki films a lot. Howl's Moving Castle and Spirited Away. Also, speaking of Spirited Away, they're going to be showing a cool, well, at least what looks to be cool, stage interpretation, theatrical interpretation of Spirited Away that made the rounds in Japan. So it's Spirited Away live on stage. All performances are in Japanese with English subtitles, and this is going to be playing April 23rd and April 27th, and that just sounds very interesting, and I'm very curious about it. Speaking of the language, all of these screenings are either in Japanese with English subtitles or have an English dub soundtrack, and it's listed on the website. I will put a link to the Fathom Events website in the podcast notes on my blog, but basically it's just fathomevents.com, and you can choose to see which screening might work for you, and also if you want it in Japanese with English subtitles or have an English dub. I'm really excited about Studio Ghibli Fest. I will have a list in the full calendar on the podcast notes on my blog, as well as links to the Fathom Events website. Well, I'm excited this week to share a conversation I had with animation director Steven Anderson. Steven worked many years for Walt Disney Animation Studios. He was the director of the film Meet the Robinsons, and he co-directed with director Don Hall the 2011 remake or just kind of reboot of Winnie the Pooh. And he began his career at Disney working on Tarzan, and has just got I think a really interesting story. And he's also working on right now a really cool book that chronicles the 2 decades in between the death of Walt Disney in 1966 to when Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, and Jeffrey Katzenberg took over management of the Walt Disney Company in 1986. So really wonderful to talk to Steven, and I hope you'll enjoy this discussion. Well, I've got the honor and privilege of having Steven Anderson on the podcast. Welcome, Steven. It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you, Stanford. It's great to meet you as well. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's just so great to get the opportunity to talk with you, Steven. I'm a big fan of your work. Steven has been a story artist and director, and I think a voice artist too, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
at Walt Disney Animation Studios. Steven is the director of the film Meet the Robinsons, as well as a co-director of the 2011 film Winnie the Pooh. And am I missing anything else on the director front, Steven?
I did the first season of Monsters at Work for
Oh
Disney Plus.
yes, that's right, for Disney Plus.
Also in 20 when that air 2021. Surprising
2021, I
good.
think. Does that sound right? Yeah. Uh, well, excellent. And I am again just so happy to get to talk with you. We
Thank you.
uh, you had mentioned to me that in addition to your film work, you are working on a very cool book project that I think will be of great interest to fans of Disney animation, and I think just fans of film itself. Could you tell us a little bit about it, Steve?
Yeah, I'd love to. The book is called Disney In Between, and it is about the studio from 1966 through 1986. So that it begins with Walt Disney's death at the end of 66, and then kind of wraps up at the end of 86 once Eisner and Katzenberg and Frank Wells are in and settled and starting to really see the changes happening in the films, due to their efforts there in those first couple of years. So yeah, a lot of people refer to that era. So we're talking about the set, basically the tail end of the 60s, 70s, and then the early 80s. Oftentimes referred to as the dark ages
The Dark Ages, right?
of the studio's
Right.
history, which I find really fascinating. I mean, on the one hand, I have great nostalgia for that time period because that's the Disney I grew up with. So
Yes.
I saw
Yes.
those movies in the theater and I watched Wonderful World of Disney every Sunday and I just ate it all up. But then on the other hand, it is a time that's not um, discussed as much. Uh, because it isn't a very rosy time. There's not the studio, to be honest, stumbled a little bit and kind of had to redefine what Disney was without Walt, and also as Hollywood was changing in the 70s and then in the 80s once Lucas and Spielberg kind of took hold of the business and the blockbuster became um, what everybody wanted. Disney had to figure out, okay, how do we fit into that? And so that I just found that really fascinating, to explore kind of that in between phase.
Yes.
Um, so that's what I'm doing.
Well, again, I can't wait to read this. I want to read it, today. So, from an animated film perspective, this would go from Jungle Book to The Black Cauldron. Is it with that? Is that right?
Ye-
Or are you?
uh,
Is the Great Mouse Detective
Great Mouse Detective, yeah,
in
sort of.
there too? That's the kind of the okay,
Yeah,
because that was well underway before the final Eisner takeover. Although they had
yeah,
input, right?
yeah, and really instrumental in saving Disney animation because Eisner and Katzenberg were so underwhelmed with Black Cauldron that they were thinking about
Yeah,
shutting down animation. But it was
yeah,
because of Ron Clements and John Musker and Bernie Mattinson and Dave Mitchner. Their pitch of Great Mouse Detective impressed them enough to say, okay, let's keep it going at least for this movie and
wow,
see how it goes. And then the rest, and then that led to the Renaissance, the late
right.
'80s and early '90s.
Well, I'm with you. I grew up with the films from the dark era. In fact, I just had a friend on the podcast a few weeks ago. We were gushing about our love for Robin Hood,
Yeah,
and uh, and there's so many of those films I like. I love The Rescuers.
yeah.
It's one of my favorites too. Do you have a film from that period that's that you particularly love, or do you feel that it's representative of it?
Yeah. There's a kind of a handful. Huge fan of Bedknobs and Broomsticks and Pete's Dragon.
Oh yes, okay. See, I'm thinking I've just got my animation hat on, but you're right.
Yeah,
We've got these other films that have animation in them, but
yeah. I love
still,
those films. I
yes,
mean, I have a real soft spot for the Black Cauldron. Um, I admit that it's not one of the better films of the studio's output, but I remember gosh, I don't know when I first heard about it. I feel like I read about it when I was a kid for years because it was in production for so long, and I read the books in preparation to see it, and I was just so excited to see it. And when it finally came out, I just loved it. So again, I have a real nostalgia for the Black Cauldron, even though now I can see it, a little more objectively, and you can tell that there was some struggles going on behind the scenes there. I remember as a kid too seeing the Apple Dumpling Gang and Escape from Witch Mountain a
Yes.
million times and loving those
Same
movies
here.
so much.
Lo-
And of
Love
course, the
those.
Herbie movies. Love those films. I also have a strange affinity for the Black Hole.
Oh,
Um,
Steven, so do I. I
yeah,
absolutely love the black hole.
yeah,
And I know seeing it through different eyes that maybe it isn't the greatest film. I just think the production design is
yeah,
so remarkable,
yeah. It's
and
gorgeous.
I love it.
And to watch it and realize that entire movie was shot on the Disney lot. There's no,
Yeah,
there's like everything's a soundstage or a matte painting, you know,
right.
and it
And
really is like that old fashioned craft of making movies.
yes, did you? So, quick question about the Black Cauldron. Have you had? Are there still? I mean, I know. What was my friend calling it? The Katzenberg cut. I
Oh
guess,
yeah,
or is it? Have you seen any of those uh different or like work in progress cuts of the Black Cauldron?
I've
Uh,
never, I've
Given
never,
your access, or do they even exist?
it's a really good question. I've never actually seen a cut. I've seen, I'm sure you have as well. If you go online and kind of, you can find some breadcrumbs
Yes.
to some of the different potential versions that were out there. Um, I I'm wondering if there really was ever a alternate cut, or if it was really just trims that Katzenberg made. You know what I mean? Like if there the pre Katzenberg cut may not have been wildly different from the finished movie. It may, what I got
Okay.
a sense of is it was more editorial trims and kind of like cutting out sections and things like that.
Yes.
Sounds like the drastically different versions would be more in the script and storyboard phases early on. Like there were some definite different um, iterations of some of the sequences that are in the final film that are kind of interesting to muse about. If they had actually done that, how would that have made a different film?
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I get a sense that Katzenberg didn't do too much huge editing. It was more little bits and pieces here and there.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
What or who have you been able to talk with about, or to interview for this book? Because you just seem to be so well suited and positioned to be able to talk to people who were working on things, and also you know respectfully, who's still alive
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
talk to.
Well, that was the tricky thing, certainly about the live action side of things, because, I mean, for the most part, the majority of the established Disney live action group that came from Walt's time and transitioned into the 70s and continued making movies without him, they're all gone.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that you could only get anecdotally through talking with other people.
Hmm.
But on the live action end, I was really lucky to get to speak with Gary Nelson, who directed
Oh
the
wow,
Black Cauldron,
directed the
or
Black
excuse me,
Hole.
Black Hole and Freaky Friday.
Yes.
Another great one that I saw a million times when I was a kid.
Oh, that's
Um,
such a delight. Yeah.
I spoke with a man named Mark Sturdivant, who was the writer of Condor Man
Oh wow.
and was going to produce the first version of Roger Rabbit when Daryl Van Sitters was the animation supervisor. This was pre Zemeckis and pre Spielberg. Um, it was Mark Sturdivant who actually brought the property to Disney. Um, So I got to speak with him. Spoke with one of the screenwriters of Black Hole. Spoke with Charles Martin Smith, who's an actor who was in. He was the lead in Never Cry Wolf, and
Oh, yes. Okay.
and he did a couple earlier Disney
He
comedies.
did some other Disney comedies, didn't
Yeah,
he?
Herbie Goes Bananas, and
Okay.
yeah. So those were some of those folks. Animation wise, the first person I started talking with was Bernie Mattinson,
Bernie. Yeah.
because we were in the middle of making Winnie the Pooh, or kind of. I think we might have been almost done when I started talking with him, but I was like, Bernie is sitting right here,
Oh, my
and he
goodness.
started in 1953, so he has seen it all. I mean, literally has seen almost the entire history of the company, save for what maybe 20 or 30 years prior to
Yeah.
him starting. Um, so I started with Bernie. He had great insights. I talked with Ron and John, Mike Gabriel, Chris Buck, Mike Giamo, Jerry Reese.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
so quite a few of those guys that kind of came. I did get a chance. Very fortunate to get a chance to talk some with Don Bluth
Oh,
about
yeah.
his feelings about everything that happened, all the
Yes.
controversies there, which was really wonderful. He was great. So yeah, I tried to, it's one of those, how if you do anything creative, you're always like, oh, I wish I could have done more, when I wish I could have added this, or I wish I could have. There's so many people I would have loved to have talked with and fill out the story.
Yeah.
I'm in that mode right now of like coulda, woulda, shoulda. But
Yes.
I got as many folks as I could, and I think I got a good sense of the overall arc of that time period. So I'm really fortunate to speak with those that I was able to speak with.
Oh, Stephen, I honestly, I can't wait for this
Cool.
book
Thanks.
to get released. Thank you for giving us a really great preview
Yeah.
into your work with it. When do you anticipate it being published? Is that still too far out there? I don't want to. I don't want to
Uh,
pry.
well, the hope is so the company that's publishing it is called Old Mill Press. They do some really beautiful books. They just recently did a book on Claude Coates, the
Oh yeah,
Imagineer. Um,
that Dave uh, Busser wrote, right? Or
yep,
okay, yeah,
yep. And so the hope is early next year at the latest,
okay,
so that maybe we can leverage next summer's D23. Uh,
yes,
hopefully that timing would be right there.
it'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Uh, well, excellent. Well, can't wait, and just wish you the best as you're coming to the finish line on
Thank
this
you.
mammoth, wonderful project.
Thanks. I'll
Well,
keep you posted.
please do. Yes, please do. Uh, and I will be following closely to along, anxiously waiting. So, Stephen, tell us about your path to animation. How, what was your process like, and how did you end up arriving at Disney Feature Animation?
Mm. Well, I feel like the most core memory, like the earliest core memory for me is watching Disney movies in the movie theater, or particularly in the drive-in movie theater,
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of them. And there was something about Disney movies that made me want to go home and draw, to try to particularly the characters, the expressions on the characters, the eyes, the body language, the poses. They're so appealing to me, and I really wanted to see if I could capture those on paper myself. So that really led to a love of drawing, led to a love of animation, bigger than Disney, like really a love of just the craft of animation, which also then kind of blossomed into a real love of movies, and learning more about screenwriting and about what a director does. And so my interest kind of grew um, to more of a story slash directing kind of place. I started as an animator. Um, that's what I wanted to do when I went to Cal Arts, which is the big
Yes.
sponsored animation school out here in California. Um, and so I was really focusing on animation. But when I got out in the industry, the first couple of years as an animator, I realized, I think this is not uh, not my strong point. Not my strong suit. I loved parts of being an animator, but there was a whole technical side of being an animator that was just like my brain was way too small to be able to handle all that stuff. But what I found is that I really loved storyboarding and story development. So then I was able to transition into that world. Um, uh, I had met um, Kevin Lima, who ended up directing Tarzan and a Goofy
Tarzan.
movie and
Yeah.
Enchanted. I was working at a
And
studio.
a Goofy movie,
Yeah,
right?
yep.
Yeah.
I was working at a studio called Hyperion, right out of Cal Arts,
Okay.
and Kevin was there developing some projects that he was slated to direct if and when they came to fruition. And I struck up a friendship with him, and I really we got close, and I really enjoyed his company, and he was very encouraging to me. Because I said I'd love to do story someday, and he said, he encouraged me and wanted to help me do that. Um, so he left Hyperion, went to direct a Goofy movie, and then that transitioned to him going to direct Tarzan at Disney Feature Animation, which led him to say, "Hey, you want to come over and work on Tarzan as a story artist?" And I was like, "You don't have to ask me twice." Yeah,
Yes.
I would love to do that. And then the other cool thing was that the director he was going to be working with, his name was Chris Buck,
Yes.
who went on to direct
Frozen
Frozen's,
and
and
yeah, both the Frozens, and then also Surf's Up, right?
Surf's
Didn't
Up.
he
Yeah,
direct Surf's Up over at Sony?
he
Yeah.
did. Yeah, he was my animation teacher at Cal Arts, so I
Oh
knew Chris
wow.
already.
Okay.
So I was like, "Well, this is perfect. These two guys, I really love Kevin and Chris. I would love to work with them." And of course, I would love to do story at Disney. So I hopped over there in 1995, starting on Tarzan, and and that was the beginning for me at Disney Features.
That is fascinating, and just these series of relationships, right,
Yeah.
and things that move this forward. So you worked on Tarzan, and clearly was that when it really started in development around 95, or had it been going on before?
Um, I, so so Kevin had done a Goofy movie at what sort of became Disney Toon Studios.
Toon Studio,
I don't know if it was
yes.
actually called that at the time,
At
but
the time, I don't. Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
yeah.
I don't recall.
So then, and I don't remember who suggested Tarzan, but Kevin started developing Tarzan at this. Let's say it was Disney Toon Studios.
Okay.
And then they decided, you know what, this is much bigger. This is a much bigger story. It should probably move over to features and be told on a bigger scale. So he was developing it, I don't know, maybe a year or so before 1995. I might have that slightly wrong, but in general, I believe that's true. Um, so when I got on to Tarzan, Kevin and Chris were still working out their deals with Disney. So I was literally like, I had nothing to do. I was one of the first few people to come on to Tarzan, and I actually sat around for a couple months waiting for them to start. So it was really like ground floor on that
Yes.
film, for sure.
Well, that I think is such a terrific film.
Yeah,
What was it like working on that project?
it was super exciting because I it was so very different for Disney. I don't know. There was something about doing an adventure movie, doing kind of a pulp, uh,
Yes.
something that had its roots in the pulp stories of the old days. Um, something. I mean, it was very Disney. The all the fundamentals of it were very Disney, and Kevin and Chris's sensibilities are very Disney. But there was something really different about it, and that was really exciting. It did take a long time to crack the story. I was on Tarzan for about 3 years,
Yeah.
and that's kind of a longer than usual
Hmm.
for some of these movies, or at least at the time. Um, so it took a while. There was quite a few iterations, and eventually got there. But yeah, I really proud to have that as my first movie at Disney.
Oh, absolutely. Stephen, what was the work like? As you're spending those 3 years working on and crafting the story, are you just in meetings the whole time? Could you give us a sense about kind of just how does that work? Or do you come to a meeting and then you go back and you're drawing furiously? How does that work?
Yeah, there were. It was kind of like the last scenario that you mentioned there. Like lots of meetings because the
Hmm.
story team was involved in brainstorming and script reads and meetings with the writers and all that kind of stuff. You also get together in the room when story artists are pitching their sequences, so you have those story meetings as well, where not so much story development, but like reacting to people's pitches and getting those ready to go down to editorial to be put on film. Um, and then yeah, time spent at your desk actually doing your work, doing your storyboards. Um, so yeah, a mix of those kind of things. So yeah,
Well, the final film is a knockout. So
yeah,
you,
yeah,
now after that, was it The Emperor's New Groove that was your
yeah.
next project? So were you on that project throughout the entire Kingdom of the Sun, Kingdom in the Sun uh,
Um,
stuff, or what point did you join that project?
yeah. So it was funny because let's see, I got off of Tarzan in I think like fallish of '98 or like late summer '98. And I wanted to go work on this other movie that was in development at the time. Um, but the studio said, we need you to go over and work on Kingdom of the Sun just to help out to get to this screening. So Kingdom of the Sun had been going for a couple years simultaneously with Tarzan. Um, in fact, several of my friends that worked on Tarzan, about halfway through Tarzan's story development process, had rolled off of Tarzan and went on to Kingdom of the Sun. So I knew a lot of people working on it. Kingdom had a few screenings at that point, and they were gearing up for another one, which is common to screen these movies multiple times in storyboard form.
Yes.
So I was free, and they needed some extra hands to help get to that screening. So I said, you sort of have to do that when they ask you to do that." So I went over for, I don't know, maybe a week or so, and did some boards. Um, and then was like, I'm going to go work on this other movie then. I'd really like to go over there. So thank you very much. Happy to help. Goodbye. And they said, no, stay on Kingdom for a little bit, at least till the screening. And the screening turned out to be the screening
Oh, it was the
where
screening.
everything melted
Okay.
down and
Yeah.
Kingdom of the Sun sort of went into a tailspin. Um, and I kind of got caught in that tailspin. And then, but ultimately, the good news was once they decided to go into a totally different direction and do the comedy version that Mark Dindal was pitching. Um, Mark Dindal and the producer Randy Fulmer offered to give me the head of story job on that film. And I said,
Okay.
okay, I'll stay and do that. So never got to work on my other movie, but I'm glad that it worked out, and I'm glad that I got to work on Groove instead.
Well, that movie is just such a kick,
Yeah,
and so unique.
yeah.
Like, I still can't believe it got made.
Mm.
From this outsider's perspective.
Oh, I'm with you. Whenever I see bits and pieces of it, like flipping channels or something, I'm like, I can't believe we got away with that because it's
Yes,
so
'cause
broad and
it's
so, I forget how cartoony it is
Mhm.
oftentimes, and then when I see it again, I'm like, man, how did you'd never be able to do that today, you know, would never fly.
I just think it's delightful. I recently watched that, documentary, the
Oh
Beware the
yeah,
Groove documentary too, and that was, interesting, to learn more about the history of
yeah.
that and your contributions to that as well too. So after the Emperor's New Groove, then uh, at what was there another film that you worked on, or what point did you start working on Meet the Robinsons? What would become Meet the Robinsons?
Hmm. Well, I finished on Emperor's New Groove, and I had expressed interest to the studio that someday I would love to be considered as a director there, and they said that sounds great, and you did a great job with on Emperor's New Groove as a in a leadership capacity. They
Hmm.
said we want you to do one more leadership role before we um, before we feel like you're ready to transition into directing. So that movie was Brother Bear.
Oh, okay.
It was made out in the mostly made out in the Florida
In
studio.
Florida. Did you
Uh,
relocate to Florida
I
to
did,
work on
yeah.
that? Okay.
Started maybe like 5 or 6 months here, and then we relocated out there for about a year and a half for Brother Bear. And then as that was wrapping up, the discussions about directing kind of came back. And when I moved back to LA, the studio had this script that they developed, and it was called A Day with Wilbur Robinson, based on this
Yeah.
book by Bill Joyce.
The Bill Joyce book, yes.
And they said,
Which is so cute. I love that
"Yeah,
book,
yeah,
you know?
it's super charming
Yes.
and inventive, as all of Bill's stuff is."
But
Um,
not a lot of plot in
no,
that
no,
book.
and that was, that was what was interesting, is that the studio had hired a writer, and the writer and a couple of the development executives developed a whole story and a whole thing, um, to flesh out that book. And so the head of development at the time said, "Why don't you read this and see if it's something you might want to potentially direct, or at least help us develop for a while?" And I read it, and I came back and I said, "Yeah, you don't understand. I have to do this movie." And I explained to them that um, I was adopted, um, and the story that was created by the development team was had this boy named Lewis who was an orphan, and he was trying to
Yeah.
get adopted, and also asking all these questions about where he came from, and who was his birth mother, and why did she give him up, which were questions that I'd been asking ever since I can remember, because my parents told me very early that I was adopted. So it
Mhm.
really, all those questions came up in my head. I said, I
Such a
really
personal
understand this
film.
kid. I
Yeah.
totally get this boy and what's going on in his head. And I said, I have to do this movie. And the studio had no idea that I had that connection to the material, but somehow it was just kind of meant to be. So that began that journey.
How, and how did that process evolve, or that, that film evolve? Did it stick a lot to that original script? Were there a lot of changes? And I do remember too, Stephen, that, uh, John Lasseter and Ed Catmull came
Mhm.
on board as Meet the Robinsons was coming to completion, right? Could you tell us a little bit about about that, about the, I guess, the evolution of the story and the process?
Yeah. Uh, yes, it's a very complex answer. Because
Yeah,
it was a
yeah.
complex process. Uh, but yeah, we stuck pretty closely to the basic idea of that first script. We did do some rewriting with the original writer, and then we brought on another writer, and then ourselves as the story team. We wrote material as well, and kind of
Hmm.
just kept evolving it. But the time travel aspect, Lewis being an orphan, um, the memory scanner invention that he has, and pretty much most of the characters and the cast of the movie all came from that original script. So uh, we were pretty faithful to that. But then, as you storyboard stuff and as you get in there, you start finding things you want to tweak, and you want to rearrange, and you want to clarify, and um, so it definitely evolved. Um, and then, yeah, we worked for about, well, the whole movie for me was about 4.5 years.
Oh, wow.
I would
Okay.
say, and John came in like the last year ish of that, uh, early 2006. And the funny thing is, the first day, so the John's first day, no, sorry, the day it was announced that John was taking over Disney Animation was the day of our first recruited audience preview.
Oh, wow.
We were
Okay.
pretty far along. We had, I think, at least 75-80% of the movie animated.
Okay.
And then we, with all the Pixar involvement, we ended up probably reanimating like 60% of that.
Oh my
So we did
goodness.
do, and our release date wasn't changing either. So we had about 6 months to kind of refresh the movie. Uh,
Holy smokes. Did anybody even get to go home at night? You know, you're just there working
yeah, yeah, we did.
24/7. Oh my
But
stars.
so it was tough, actually, because even before John came on, to be totally frank, the leadership at Disney Animation at that time was pretty dysfunctional, and
Yeah.
we had been just fighting battles nonstop with the leadership,
Mhm.
trying to protect the movie because there was a lot of feedback that we felt was not in the movie's best interest. So we were trying to, like, shield the characters and the theme and the story we all
Yeah.
wanted to tell.
Yeah.
And then we were able to get new leadership, which was exciting. But then we got slammed with another big series of pretty involved and impactful notes. Um, so it was a lot. It was
Yes.
quite a ride, but I'm very proud to say, when if you look at our very first storyboard screening of the movie, and then you look at the final movie, it's a lot different. But the characters are the same, the story is the same, the emotional core is the same, the theme is the same. There are some sequences that are almost identical to the first version. So I do think we were able to hold on to the that core that we were all really passionate about, um, and the story that we wanted to tell, and we did get to tell that story. So I'm very proud of that.
Well, kudos to you and and the team. It's really it's such a meaningful, wonderful film. And
Thank you,
you did such a great job
thank you.
on it. Yeah, it's really been a favorite. So after that, hopefully, did you get a break? Did you get some time off?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
I did. Yeah, went into development, kind of worked on a few ideas, and then John asked me if I'd be interested in um, or developing a Winnie the Pooh movie with my good friend and colleague Don Hall.
Yes.
Pardon me, and that was the beginning of another really amazing project. Never in my life did I think I was going to be working on a Winnie the Pooh film,
Oh,
but here I
seriously?
was, and it was a blast. And what was different about it for feature animation, usually it features the movies are, they might be based on some existing material, but for the most part, you're starting with a blank page and you're building everything
Yes.
from zero. Um, but what's neat about Winnie the Pooh is the world existed, the characters existed. We
Yeah.
know how they spoke. We know what their personalities were. We knew how they interacted with each other. Like, we could just start working. We didn't have to spend that, those first few months of, like, okay, what is this going to be, and what is it going to be,
Yes.
like, that blank page syndrome. Um, we could just start working, and that was great because we really were able to build ahead of steam really fast, and it was fun because we did it kind of the old fashioned way. We just did it with drawings. Our story team, we all just sat in the room and we just scribbled out ideas and pinned them up, and eventually built an outline and went from there. So it was really cool.
Steven, what was it like to after? Because I felt like the CGI and or just the CG animation in Meet the Robinsons was really uh, stunning, and in a lot of ways, I felt it was groundbreaking. Again, just from this, from an animation fan's
Well, thanks.
perspective. Uh, and then going back on a really cool hand drawn animation project. What was that like? And was the I mean, what were some of the production challenges too, or how did that all work?
Yeah, I think the weird thing about the weird and cool thing about Winnie the Pooh is, and I was just saying this to somebody else recently. We kept waiting for somebody to throw a grenade into the process, or like the other shoe to drop. We were having so much fun, and we're like,
So much
this
fun.
isn't going to last. Something's going to happen. There's going to be a
Yeah.
catastrophe, um, and it never came. It was amazing how smooth it was. It was amazing how the team just, like, rallied around the movie and just made it happen. Um, so I would say like it was more artistic challenges than it was like production challenges.
Okay.
Like we wanted to, how are we going to get a sense of that? You know, the the Disney's original three Winnie the Pooh shorts were made during that time of the Xerox process, where
Yes.
the animators' drawings were Xeroxed onto the cells. So you get that really cool kind of scratchy line, uh,
Yes.
wiggly line sometimes,
Hmm.
as well as the backgrounds have that real heavy, bold outline on the on to sort of fill in the detail in the backgrounds, and we wanted to reproduce that, and so it was like how do we do that, and how do we use digital tools to still get a hand drawn feel? Like for example, the characters were all animated on paper, but the backgrounds were all and the backgrounds were drawn on paper, but they were painted digitally to look like watercolor. um, so it was actually also kind of a neat challenge to how do we merge the best of the digital tools, like 2D digital tools, with the best of the hand-drawn animation look and feel.
Hmm.
So that was kind of fun. It was a really neat challenge to do that. um,
Well, and I think that you succeeded because that film is just so light and breezy and fun, and it just I think that as you described it, the fun that you were having making it, I think really shows
oh, thanks. Yeah,
on the big screen.
it was like it was really yeah, it really was like that. We had more material than we needed, and the first couple screenings we just sort of whittled it down to essentially what it is today, and then the rest of it was like clarifying, punching up jokes. um I mean, one other challenge too was what, like, what's the rhythm of a Winnie the Pooh film for the 2000s? uh the
Yes.
60s and the early 70s films are super charming, but are they a little too slow for today's audiences?
Yeah.
At the same time, we don't want to turn it into, SpongeBob or
Right.
The Odd Parents or something. Not that there's anything wrong with those shows, but like
No, but it's Winnie
that
the Pooh.
might be
Right?
too much. What's the right balance of like pace and tone, and where can we stretch the humor just a little bit more, but when it's too far. So those were some of the challenges as well. But like I said, it was all really creative challenges as opposed to technical challenges or politics, studio politics getting in the way
Yes.
of anything. Like none of that was there. It was all just, okay, how do we make this movie the best it can be? Which is that's the environment you want.
Oh my god! Right, like the perfect creative environment.
Yeah.
Uh, you mentioned earlier, and I had seen some of these things that you and others had posted on Twitter, talking about Bernie Manson
Hmm.
and what a loss, right?
Hmm.
To have Bernie leave us.
Yeah.
What was your experience? Did you get to work with Bernie a lot through the years, or was it more heavily with the Winnie the Pooh project? What was your relationship like with him, and anything else you want to say about Bernie?
Yeah. It began with Winnie the Pooh.
Okay.
Although I passed Bernie in the halls all the time, and I knew who Bernie was. Two of my favorite films are Mickey's Christmas Carol and Great Mouse Detective, two of my favorite Disney films,
Yeah.
and Bernie
Yeah.
was director and producer on
Bernie directed both of those, right?
them. And so I knew who he was. The thing I kicked myself about in my early days at Disney is that I was so intimidated by those older guys. Like at the time, Bernie was there, Joe Grant was there, and there's a story guy named Vance Gary. I don't know if you're familiar with Vance. Vance dates back to, I think he did layout on Sleeping Beauty, and then
Oh
became a
wow.
story artist on Jungle Book. I think was his first
Okay.
movie. Um, and those three guys, I was so intimidated by them that I was afraid to talk to them. I mean, I would say hello in the halls and casual conversations at the Xerox machine or whatever.
Right.
It's not like I avoided them, but uh, I kick myself in retrospect for not actually, going into their offices and sitting down and saying, "Hello, I'm so and so. I love your work. can I learn? What can I learn from you? Can you
Yes.
tell me your stories? Um, so when we were beginning Winnie the Pooh, where my office was at the time was very close to Bernie's, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to just go in there and say hi to this guy. I don't, because by that point, I think Joe had passed away, Vance had passed away, and I was like, I'm just going to go talk to Bernie. This is stupid. I'm just going to go do this. So I brought my Great Mouse Detective poster in, and I said, hey, could you sign my poster? This is one of my favorite films. And he was like, oh, you just made my day. And he was the nicest man in the world. And I was like,
Oh my
what was I
goodness.
so afraid of all these years? But that led to me going to Don Hall, my co-director, and saying, hey, Bernie worked on several of the original shorts. He has such a Disney spirit and and feel to everything he does. What if we brought him on just to help us out, or just to like be a kind of a guiding light for us on the project? And Don was like, "Yeah, that's a great idea." So we did, and it it was the biggest joy to me to get to both call Bernie a friend, but also call Bernie a colleague. Like there were a few times during Winnie the Pooh in our story room that um, I would be sitting at the table and we'd be brainstorming an idea, and I would sort of go into my head and leave the meeting for a moment and say, Bernie Mattinson is sitting right next to me on a and I'm doing story work with him on a movie that I'm directing, and he's right there, and it's not weird to anybody except me. Like, but it's like this is just our day right now, and I thought this
Right.
it's amazing. So I just cherished every day with Bernie. Every time I got a chance to see him, he was such a light. He had such a wonderful smile, such a wonderful laugh, such a big hearty laugh
Hmm.
that just made you happy. So I'm so glad that I had the chance to, for my life to connect with his.
Oh, absolutely. What a treasure. And uh for that, as you describe him, of course I never got to meet him in
Mhm.
person, but you just see interviews and things with him. He just radiates it, doesn't
Yeah,
he? Just this goodness and kindness and
yeah,
talent and optimism and
yeah.
uh
Just like a pure person. I rarely ever heard a negative word come out of his mouth. Nothing duplicitous or he was who he was, and who he was this light, like you're saying, like
yes.
just this, just like you said, radiating this kind of joy and positive energy. So he was a really great guy.
Well, I love that story, and good on you for taking advantage of those
Yeah, I wish it didn't take me that long,
opportunities.
but
Hey, you did it.
yeah, yeah.
Which is wonderful. Well, any other stories then to take us between the creation of Winnie the Pooh and now that you'd like to share? Were there some other films that you worked on that were particularly memorable? Well, also one other thing I wanted to mention. If I'm not mistaken, Stephen, weren't you the voice of the bowler hat guy in Meet the Robinsons?
Yes, I was.
So okay, so and have you done some additional voice work? I think I saw that in your,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. I mean, this happens a lot with animation,
yes,
where
the scratch track, or is that what
exactly.
it is? Okay,
And then the scratch track, we screen these movies so many times, and the scratch sometimes gets uh married to the character, and it's really hard to get for everybody's brains to kind of readjust to a different voice. So then, like the case of pardon me, Brad Bird with Edna Mode, or Chris
yes,
Sanders with Stitch, there's
yeah.
precedent for that kind of thing. So that's kind of how it happened with me, and subsequently after Meet the Robinsons, similar kind of things would happen where you do scratch, and then they keep your voice in there. Um, so yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do. I like doing it.
Well, you're good at it too. So,
I'll
so
add
anyway,
one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, please after you.
I was going to say I'll add one more Bernie Winnie the Pooh story. If that's okay.
Yes,
Um,
excellent.
so early on, when we started talking with Bernie about the project, One day he came in with this stuffed Winnie the Pooh, and he showed it to us. And he said, "I'll tell you the story about this stuffed Winnie the Pooh." So he said, back in the mid '60s or whenever they were in production of Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, the first short,
Yes.
he said Wooly Reitherman, who was directing it, went around and said, "Hey, we're going to do this live action opening, and we'd like to have a stuffed Winnie the Pooh. Is there anybody here in the building that makes dolls or stuffed toys that you could make a Pooh for us?" And Bernie said, "Oh, my wife makes them." And his wife's name was Sylvia, and she also worked at the studio. She was a cleanup in betweener,
Okay.
and so he told her about it, and so she made this a stuffed Winnie the Pooh. And Bernie brought it in and went to Wooly and said, "Hey, how about this? My wife made this." And Wooly said, "Oh, I wish I'd have known earlier." He said, "We already got one. Somebody already made one, and we're going to use it in the live action opening. I'm so sorry we can't use it." And so Bernie said, "Oh, that's okay." And so he took it home, and he said his kids played with it, and it just has been in a box in his attic or something. And so he said, "Let's bring it in." And he wanted to bring it in and show it to us. And Don and I were both like, "Okay, that's the Winnie the Pooh that's going to be in our live
Oh
action
my
opening, because
goodness.
we're going to do a live
Seriously.
action opening, and we need a Winnie the Pooh. And here's one right here. So the Pooh that you see in the live action opening of the movie is was made by Bernie's late wife
Bernie's
Sylvia.
his wife.
Yeah, and was like
Oh, I
the
love
runner-up
that.
to being in the original live action opening. So
Do you
thanks.
think the
Yeah.
studio's going to do any other, kind of Winnie the Pooh
I don't know. I
thing?
I hope so.
Yeah.
We were trying to kind of keep it going. We started developing a holiday special, like a Happy
Oh, okay.
Hour holiday special, and
Yeah.
the talk after the movie was done was, let's keep let's keep making material, even though the studio wasn't moving forward with any of it. But was like, let's just start building a library of stuff that we can eventually make once the studio decides to keep going with it. And they never decided to keep going with it. So um, I don't know. Uh, now that he's public domain, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, obviously the Disney version is not public domain, but
Right.
now anybody can make anything Winnie the Pooh. So I don't know if that means the company is going to want to either assert their Pooh strong in a stronger way, or if that's
Yeah.
going to mean they're just going to want to kind of keep it quiet. I don't know. I don't know.
Right.
Good question.
Any other uh, stories you'd like to share about story development or think projects that you worked on
Mm.
after Winnie the Pooh?
Yeah, I mean, I went back into development after Winnie the Pooh. I was in development for a really long time, and I had a project that had been going for quite a few years, but it stalled out, and I got really discouraged, and I decided to step away from it, because I just I lost my compass. I kept saying, but then this great opportunity came, in the form of an invitation to go over to TV animation at Disney and work on Monsters at Work, this series for Disney Plus that was being executive produced by two friends of mine that I knew from Disney Toon Studios, Bob's Ganaway and Farrell Barron.
Yes.
And so I went over there and had an just a blast making Monsters at Work. I mean, the crew is so great. It's such a fun world to play in. The characters are
Yes.
great. It's like,
It's a fun
I
show.
mean, it's sort of like, it was a bit like Winnie the Pooh, where it's like there's this. I mean, yeah, there's work to it because and everything takes work to make a movie or a TV show, but it's like the world is so fun. The characters are so fun. It's so much like just playing with the best toys you can imagine.
Yes.
So that was really great. And for me, what was great is I'd been sitting in development for so long and it had been so long since I was in production that with on Monsters, my first day was like, hit the ground running. We're making stuff right now. And so the pace of TV was exactly what I needed to kind of get me out of my funk that I'd been in for a few years, because I'd been sort of feeling like I was atrophying. um, not get just develop putting research boards together upon research board upon research board upon research
Yeah,
board.
yeah.
Like, this is great and all, but I really want to make something. So Monsters came along at the perfect time. Um, and then I left the studio. I left Disney in 2021. Decided to strike out on my own. So been working on a few things that I think are announced, but are not quite fully baked yet. So
Okay.
my role is done, but they've yet to come out. So, but some cool things on the horizon.
Oh,
I'll
good.
kind of leave it at
So
that
we'll
for now.
we'll stay tuned
Yeah,
then to exciting things. Will you be working in both features and in TV again, Steven? I mean, at least somebody can ask you that. Oh, I don't,
yeah. I
uh,
hope so. I love both.
okay,
Uh, the one actually one of the projects I worked on since leaving was a feature, and one was a series. So yeah,
okay, excellent. Well,
and one is CG, and one is 2D.
oh
So
wow, okay.
love to. I mean, it's all great, and it all just depends on the people you're working with and the material that you're dealing with. So I'm whether it's a feature, a series, a short, 2D, CG, live action, whatever. I'm all for it.
Well, I'm gonna be excited to see these new or learn more about these new projects. So kudos to you. I'm glad that that's continuing on. Okay, last couple of things, Stephen is. I'm very curious to know if you've got a favorite Disney movie, and I think initially, I mean, I'm wondering too. It could be animation or live action, or one of each.
Right.
Yeah. What are your favorites?
I mean, every time I'm asked that question, my brain always goes to Pinocchio. Um,
Yeah.
there's it just feels to me like it is quintessential classic Disney. Um, Such a beautiful film. So much charm, so much heart, just so much beauty in it. Just
Yeah.
and the more we get into computer assisted techniques, which are all great, the more when I look back on the classic stuff, my jaw drops just to see what they were able to accomplish with paper and pencil and paint and cells and you know cranking peg bars on a camera and going click click like
Yeah.
yeah the what they were able to achieve back then with with it essentially all by hand is just stunning. So Pinocchio definitely is a restores my love for Disney and for animation.
Hmm. You know, I'm Pinocchio is such a marvel to me. I recently rewatched it. I just can't even fathom how they did those underwater. I mean, the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Every frame is gorgeous.
yeah,
Uh, but those underwater scenes, like,
yeah,
how do they do them, Steven? It's like,
yeah,
it's just remarkable to
yeah.
me.
I know it's and again it's like it's all it's all old school
Handcraft?
techniques. It's
Yeah,
like it's the most analog way you could make a movie, and they did it.
I did it, and yeah, and it still holds up.
Yeah,
Nothing's finer, right, than the work
it does.
that they did. Okay, and since this is a movie podcast, Steven, just one final question: Do you have a favorite movie? From any studio, from any time period, just
Yeah.
any favorite movie that's kind of your go-to.
Uh, I'll say. Can I say three?
Absolutely.
Uh,
I have hard. I can't. I have to say 10. You know what I mean? I
that's
can't
a hard
pick
question.
just one. It's hard. A hard question.
Raiders of the Lost Ark,
Oh
definitely.
yeah.
And then Brazil, the Terry Gilliam film,
Yes, the Terry Gilliam film. Yes.
and then maybe what I would say is I guess I might say this is my all-time favorite movie, Amadeus,
Oh yeah.
um, which is a movie that is a really made a huge impression on me when I first saw it. I guess I was 15 when it came out. And every time I go back to it, I see it from a totally different standpoint and relate to it so well.
Mhm.
um,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
because it's about the creative process
You're
and
creative.
art
Yes.
versus commerce and artists versus artists and
It's your life.
yeah,
Right? Just
it's everything. Yeah, so I'll go with those
well,
three.
those are great. Those are great choices. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
for sharing. And I just thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I
Yeah,
learned so much and just appreciate all of your great work and all that you've done and all that that is ahead of you. It's very exciting.
thank you so much,
So
Stanford. It's a real pleasure. Thanks. Great talking to you.
great talking with you. Thank you. Now, one final thing too, Stephen. Where can uh, people find you on social media?
Yes, I'm on Instagram and Twitter both as Steve Hat Guy, all one word, Steve Hat Guy, like bowler hat guy, but instead of bowler, it's Steve. Uh,
Steve.
so both Instagram and Twitter.
Well, that does it for this episode of the Movies Past and Present podcast. Many thanks again to Stephen Anderson for a great conversation and again, just what great work he's done and that he's got yet to do. Links and more information about the movies discussed in today's podcast can be found in the podcast notes on my blog at moviespastandpresent.com. Subscribe to the podcast. Links are on the blog. And follow me on Instagram. My handle is at moviespap, as in past and present. As always, I hope you will enjoy some good movies this week, whether they be from the past or the present. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, be safe out there and dedicate yourself to the truth.